Good morning, everybody. If you will all just allow me 1 second, I need to gather myself here. Tunji, who usually helps me with all the tech stuff, decided to be sick today. So Tunji, I hope that you're not in a lot of pain and that you're comfortable at home while I had to become an octopus today. So give me 1 second.
How heavy is that bus that you're
Thank
under?
you. Thank you very much. If you could all be turning your Bibles to Acts 16. A long time ago, when we started our series on Acts, which again was a long time ago, Paris. A long time ago, I asked Paris if when we got to Acts 16, if I could preach about it, and he graciously allowed me to do so. And he's very generous. And Acts 16 is very interesting because it's a major shift in years when it comes to the story that the book of Acts is telling. All right? Acts 16 is the beginning of Paul's second missionary journey. And so his first missionary journey basically spans from chapter 13 through 14. This one goes all the way almost to chapter 18. And we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to talk mostly about the beginning of his second missionary journey. But this sermon has a little bit of a prologue because there are some things that you need to know about his first missionary journey in order for what we're going to talk about to have full effect. So this is not my introduction. This is a prologue. This is a very fancy sermon because it has a prologue. So this is a map of Paul's first missionary journey. And you will notice there's just a few things that I want to know. As the book of Acts tells us, it began in Antioch, which Antioch, if you see the little laser point, is right there. All right? And they actually didn't go very far. They didn't travel a long distance. There's no way of absolutely knowing how long it took for them to go through all of this route, but scholars think that it was about 60 days. So it wasn't long in distance, and it also wasn't long in as far as the time that they were out there. All right? The other thing, and you probably can't see it from there, but where my laser point is right now, that's Tarsus, which if you know anything about Paul, that is where he's from. So culturally speaking, this whole area was very familiar to Paul. Like he went basically among his people, if you will. And even though, like when they finish their missionary journey, they come back and they tell them like, hey, the Gentiles have received the message of the gospel. And they did. But what's interesting about this region, again, this whole area here, is that it's very Jewish. If you read through their first missionary journey, sort of their way into these communities that they went into is they went to a synagogue. On the Sabbath, they will go to synagogue, and that's where they began, almost at every city, that's where they began their work, was at the synagogue. So their inn was their own people. All right? So before we begin now, this is officially my introduction. All right? So just file that information that I just gave you and put it aside for a second. It's going to be useful in a moment. But before we begin, I want to make an observation about our society in general. All right? And I say observation because what I'm about to share, I'm not sharing with any kind of judgment. This is one of these things that it is what it is, right? And as society evolves and as we sort of live our everyday lives, there are certain things that we value, all right? Every culture has values. And we, whether we like it or not, again, this is just what it is, we like things that are fast, easy, and convenient. The fast, easy, and convenient is sold to us like at every turn. All right? Again, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I am merely making an observation that in as far as our American and most Western society, we love fast, easy, and convenient. To me, there is no greater embodiment of this than this machine. All right? Yes, many of you are booing it, but seriously, raise your hand if you own one of these. All right, so the majority I just want to make an observation that the majority of the people in this room raised their hand, all right? Because this machine is fast, easy, and convenient, all right? Pedro owns one of these because he has Viking things that he needs to do, and the faster he gets to his Viking things, the happier he is, all right? So, again, this is the embodiment of fast, easy, and convenient. And the thing is that there are many other things in your house that are like this. All right? Again, I'm not making a judgment, merely making an observation. On the opposite end of the spectrum of this is obviously time, effort, and experience. All right? And to me, since we're talking about coffee, coffee is one of my favorite topics in the world. This is how I make coffee every morning. All right? For those of you who don't know what this is called a Chemex. It's just literally a glass jar, right? But making coffee with a Chemex is super involved, all right? You have to heat water to the right temperature, which the right temperature is 200 degrees, in case you didn't know. You don't use none of this pre-ground coffee. You buy whole beans and you grind them yourself, all right? And not only do you have to grind it, but you have to grind it to the right degree of coarseness. It can't be too powdery, and it can't be too coarsey. It has to be the right amount, all right? Not only that, but you don't pour the water all at one time. There are different techniques. The one that I use, you do 5 different pours of water. Before you pour the water, you actually have to rinse the filter that you put it in, all right? And again, this all takes time, effort, and experience. Before you make a good cup of coffee using one of these, you're going to make some bad cups of coffee. All right? There's a learning curve to this. All right? But when you master it, you make an awesome cup of coffee. Keurig, again, is fast, easy, and convenient, but it's horrible coffee. And that I do mean as a judgment, all right? Compared to using a Chemex, right? It's like, you're not even drinking coffee, people, all right? But, again, Pedro wants to get to his Viking things, and this just takes too long. When I started doing this, literally, right, I had to wake up earlier in the morning so I could do this. But it's totally worth it, all right? So here's the thing, and here's, as we go through what we're going to talk about today, right? Basically what I want to do is I want to challenge our culture. Because what you're about to learn is that moving the kingdom, advancing the kingdom, right, sometimes takes time, effort, and experience. So if you go with me to Acts 16, we're going to start in verse 6. So by verse 6, Paul has already began to travel, all right? And Timothy has joined them. And we're going to start reading here. It says, I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version, so if it doesn't say exactly what you're saying, do not worry. Same Bible, just different translations. It says, they went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. When they had come opposite Mysia, they attempted to go in Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. So passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision. There stood a man of Macedonia pleading with him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." When he had seen this vision, we immediately tried to cross over to Macedonia, being convinced that God had called us to proclaim the good news to them. All right? So here we begin this second journey. All right? And I just want to point out a few things. Here's a map of the route that Paul and his companions take. Where we started reading, they're already over here. So they started in Jerusalem, which is down here. They've already gone to Antioch, right? And all along, they've stopped at churches where they had already preached, right? And so we basically start, and they're in Lystra, which is right there. Now, here's the interesting thing. They are basically forbidden by the Spirit to go into this area, which is current day Turkey, all right? And also up here, like this area up here. Those are the two places that they were forbidden to go from. So as you can see, the route takes them like in between these two areas, which is where they were told not to go. They end up in Athens, which is over here, which is probably where they wanted to go in the first place, right? What's interesting about this route that basically the Spirit of God takes them on is that it makes no sense. If you're ultimately going to go to Greece, it makes a world of sense to just go through here, take a boat, and go across. All right? The way that the Spirit took them is longer. This whole area right here, this map doesn't show it, but it's all mountains. Most of their way they did on foot. All right? It's also probably more expensive because it's longer. It takes them longer to be out there and eat every day and all of that stuff, right? And also, they're avoiding some really major areas, like very important places, like, for example, up here is Damascus. I'm sorry, it's Istanbul, not Damascus. Up here is Istanbul, which is a very important city today, and it was a super important city then, and as you can see, they completely avoid it. So the Spirit takes them a longer and a more arduous way. Now, we don't know why. We have no idea why that is. But they could have much easily just gone here, taken a boat, and gone there. Or come up here, right, and just go over here. But the Spirit just took them the longer, harder way. All right, so again, just to recap, the way the Spirit took them is longer, it's harder, it's more indirect, it avoids important cities, and this is what I didn't mention, as opposed to his first journey, where they ended up in a places where there were Gentiles and Jews, they're now going into proper Gentile territory, where there are very few Jews or no Jews whatsoever. And you'll find out why we know this here in a second. So let's keep reading here. It says that we set sail from Troas and took a straight course to Samothrace. The following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is the leading city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. All right? What a Roman colony means is that literally Roman soldiers, when they retired, they would go and live in these Roman colonies. And so this city was like super, super Roman. All right? It says, we remained in the city for some days. On the Sabbath day, when we went outside the gate by the river, where we supposed there was a place of prayer, and we sat down and spoke to the woman who had gathered there. So this is how we know that there are no Jews here. Because on the Sabbath, instead of going to a synagogue, there is no synagogue. And so they go and try to find a place to pray. All right? It says, and then we sat down and spoke to the woman who had gathered there. A certain woman named Lydia, a worshiper of God, was listening to us. She was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer in purple cloth. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. When she and her household were baptized, she urged us, saying, if you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home. And she prevailed upon us. So, again, not only are they in like proper Gentile territory, right? So much so that there's no synagogue. These were Jewish men, all right? Particularly Paul, all throughout his education, who he was trained and who by and large he spoke to were other men. At the time, if you went to a synagogue, the only people that spoke at synagogue were men. If you read through his first missionary journey, not once does he speak to a woman. Every time somebody addresses him, he's speaking to other men. The reason why I mention that is because here they are, no synagogue, trying to find a place to pray, and who they stumble upon is a group of women who they are probably not used to speaking to in this kind of like teaching manner, if you will. So this experience is completely new to them. It's a new experience. They probably had to do some learning on the fly. So we are like halfway through the chapter, right? And it's not been easy nor convenient, and they've already had to learn something. Also for them, probably their first convert being a woman who was like wealthy, completely out of left field for them probably. Not to mention staying at a woman's house. These were things that Jewish men just did not do. Actually, if other Jews had probably seen them stay with Lydia, they would probably be like, whoa, what's happening here? But these are all new things, right, that require them to think and learn on the fly. Let's keep reading here. So again, just to recap, the Spirit has taken them to a foreign place that required them to learn on the fly. All right? Now, here's my favorite part of this chapter, and this is really the reason why I wanted to preach this message. All right? Starting in verse 16, it says, one day, as we were going to the place of prayer, we met a slave girl who had a spirit of divination and brought her owners a great deal of money by fortune telling. While she followed Paul and us, she would cry out, these men are slaves of the Most High, who proclaim to you a way of salvation. She kept doing this for many days, but Paul, very much annoyed, turned and said to the Spirit, I order you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her. And it came out that very hour. Now, let me point this out, and this is an important thing. One of the things that we tend to do when we read the Bible is that we tend to assign intent to people. A lot of times, the Bible doesn't tell us what people were feeling or thinking, right? So a lot of times we sort of inject what we think that they were thinking or feeling. This is not one of these cases. In this case, the book of Acts tells us that Paul was annoyed. Now, how many here do things out of annoyance that come from a good heart? Nobody just raised their hand. Nope. Charles. Nobody gets annoyed about a good heart, just so everybody knows. That's what she does. She also was the only one in the room. Most of us, but Nobi, when we get annoyed, we snap at people. Right? We say things that we don't want to say. We do things that we don't want to do. Right? Now, I don't know. Again, the Bible doesn't tell us why Paul didn't drive out the Spirit from the get-go. We don't know why he waited. But the reason why he did it is because he was annoyed. He got mad. He got bothered. Paul, believe it or not, made a mistake. Now, we think that these people never make mistakes and all that we're reading are all their perfect actions. Here is a case where Paul made a mistake. He did something out of annoyance. None of us have done something out of annoyance and it turns out to be good. We usually have to apologize some way or another. And sure enough, let's keep reading. He says, let's keep reading here. It says, but when her owners saw that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the authorities. When they had brought them before the magistrate, they said, these men are disturbing our city. They are Jews and are advocating customs that are not lawful for us Romans to adopt and observe. The crowd joined in attacking them, and the magistrate had them stripped of their clothing and ordered them to be beaten with rods. After they had given them a severe flogging, they threw them into prison and ordered the jailer to keep them securely. Following these instructions, he put them in the innermost cell and fastened their feet in the stocks. Now, this mistake cost them. All right? They got beaten with rods. They got flogged. And there's a detail in here that doesn't necessarily mean anything to us, but basically they were tortured. They were put in jail in these stocks, and basically what stocks were at this time was a metal contraption that would sort of secure you in a really awkward way. So like your leg would be going one way and your other one would be going under, and then your arm would be this way. And that's how they were secured. They were basically being tortured. And again, this all happened because Paul got annoyed. So here they are. Took them a really long way to get here. Took them a really long time. A hard journey. They finally get to where they needed to get to, and Paul makes a mistake. I mean, it went well with Lydia, but just a few days later, here we are, and they're in a horrible place. All right? Now, here's the thing, and this is one of the things that I really want us to think about here. They were taken here by the Spirit, by the guidance of the Spirit. This is where they ended up, right? And it's not going well. Again, the only reason I'm bringing this up is because our culture, again, is one of speed, ease, and convenience. And the thing is that our culture tends to influence us. Whether we like it or not, we're in this environment, and it does things to us without us really realizing it. Now, let me say this about the book of Acts, and this is an important thing. The book of Acts is not a prescriptive book, meaning that what we read in the book of Acts is not necessarily how we're supposed to live our lives. The book of Acts is telling us a story of these men that do all these stuff that we're supposed to learn from, but I'm not telling you to go to jail tomorrow. That's not what I'm doing, right? Nor am I telling you that we need to have a journey just like the one Paul and his companions had. But I will say this. In a culture in which we value speed, ease, and convenience, how willing would we be willing to go the harder, longer way that requires for us to learn new things and maybe even make some mistakes? How many things, whether in the church or in your life, did you start doing and then abandon because of mistakes? How many here led a Bible talk at some point and then made a mistake and said, never again? How many of you had a dream for something in the church or outside the church or something that you wanted to do to glorify God that you started doing, you were like, too hard, not doing it? But see, what we see here is a spirit that purposely takes people a route that is longer, harder, and requires them to learn some hard lessons. But see, here's the thing, and this is what I love about this kind of story, is that we, as Christians, need to be able to step into environments and things that are harder, longer, and require our experience. We need to be willing to walk into those spaces because of God. Because this is not where the story ends. Let's keep reading in verse 25. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God. It's interesting that only Paul and Silas were praying and singing, because maybe the other ones were going like, Paul, really? You did this? Right? Just saying. Just speculating here. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly, there was an earthquake, so violent that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were open and everyone's chains were unfastened. When the jailer woke up and saw the prison doors wide open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, since he supposed that the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted in a loud voice, "Do not harm yourself, for we are all here." The jailer called for lights, and rushing in, he fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them outside and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They answered, "Believe in the Lord, and you will be saved, you and your household." They spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. At that same hour of the night, he took them and washed their wounds. Then he and his entire family were baptized without delay. He brought them up in the house and set food for them, and he and his entire household rejoiced that he had become a believer in God. Now here's the amazing thing, and this is what we need to realize. Paul did nothing to fix this situation. He did nothing. It's not like he was sitting there calling for an earthquake. And it's interesting because the positive things that happen in the story, both when Lydia is converted, it says that God opened her heart to the message. And here they are in jail, and all of a sudden there's this earthquake, right? And it's because of this earthquake that this jailer believes in God. And so here's the thing. No matter how hard things are, no matter how much time they take, and no matter how much experience we lack, God can make up for it. The book of Acts is not a story about men. It involves men. The book of Acts is ultimately a story that tells us how the kingdom is unleashed upon the world. And that is exactly what you're seeing here. And the thing is that we need to retrain our minds and our ears and our hearts and our eyes, because a lot of times the way that the Spirit is taking us is not what we're expecting to do. No one here, when we're thinking of a plan, necessarily goes, you know what? We should choose the hardest, the longest, and the thing that's going to require for us to not know the things that we are supposed to do. Let's do that. Nobody has ever had a church meeting and come up with that plan. You know what I mean? Usually we try to make things as simple as possible, as easy as possible, as cheap as possible, and we pick the people that are the most experienced at doing whatever it is that needs to be done. God didn't do that. That is not what God did here. He took a bunch of Jews. I don't think the person that was probably the most Gentile amongst the crew that are going on this journey is probably Timothy. And he's the youngest. He was probably 13 years old. And again, this is the beginning of Paul's second missionary journey. We just got started. The thing is, and what we cannot forget, is that God is present. It's very easy to read the story of the book of Acts and forget that God is one of the characters. He is the main character of the story. Now, I wanted to end on this slide because it's super complicated. I don't even know. This is kind of like a factory to make coffee, if you will. All right? I don't even know where it starts. This is a super complex machine. But the things that are super complex and that are hard usually really scares us. And we try to stay away, as far away from them as we possibly can. But again, what we see here is that is where the Spirit took these people. It's a destination that they wanted him to go, again, was the hardest, the longest, and the one where they wouldn't know what it is that they were supposed to do. We want completely the opposite of those things. And again, the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because the culture that we live in makes it harder for us to learn this. Because everything in our life, for the most part, is quick and easy. When it comes to the things that are harder and take a lot of time, we're not necessarily always willing to go there. Like, even imagine as a church, right? If we tried a few things. Say, like, we really put money into, I don't know, really feeding the homeless. And for whatever reason, that ends up failing. Whatever failing in that particular department looks like, right? How many of us would be tempted to go like, that was a mistake? Let's not do that ever again. But what if that mistake was where we're supposed to end up for whatever reason? if that were the scenario that, like, let's say that I was the big proponent of, like, let's do this thing for the homeless and it goes horribly wrong. How many here would give me another chance to say, hey, let's do this? Because a lot of times we don't. The reality is that we don't. A lot of times people fail and we just go, never again with you. It's what we do. Because again, for me to get better would require time and more experience. And again, this is completely against our instinct. It's not what we do. The reason why it's important for us to think about this kind of stuff and to observe what happened during Paul's and his companions' times is because the Spirit works in ways that we just are not used to work, particularly in our culture. And so here's the thing. When it comes to coffee, whether you drink a Keurig or a Chemex, in the big scheme of things, it doesn't really matter. Well, I think that I personally think that my life is better because I drink better coffee, but in the big scheme of things, how I make my coffee has very little consequence on anything. But as a church, if we're going to be a church of the fast, easy, and convenient way, how far are we going to take the kingdom? If we're not the church that's willing to do the hard time, the things that take time and the things that take hard learning from experience, then who is? We have to be willing to be a church that puts time, effort, and experience into everything that we do. Mercer County is not going to be preached to in its entirety, right? Maybe even through our lifetimes. But are we doing the work, and are we doing things in our lives that slowly and with effort and with learning and experience we can bring the gospel to? And see, that's the thing. Like, we think so many times that it needs to be done like tomorrow. And yesterday, I'm supposed to have come with this solution. And this person needs to come with like all this experience and all this knowledge. Otherwise, we can't use them. That's not how God works. That is just not how God works. And the thing is, and see, here's the thing. There are many people here sitting in this room, right, that stopped dead in their tracks doing something that they were really excited about. Because it was hard, because it took longer than they thought it would take, and because they thought they lacked the experience. We can't be those people. Somehow your dream can bring glory to God, but you need to take your time, and you need to put the effort in, and you need to be willing to fail. But we also need to be willing to people that do that for others. That we're willing to look at other people and put effort into them, put time into them, and allow people to fail. And this goes for everything that we do. You know, my wife and I did youth ministry for a long time. And we always had really good relationships with the parents of the kids that were in our ministry. And we would always sort of get into these conversations with parents in which they would ask us, like, you know, what do I do to help my child sort of like become closer to God? And in our experience, the answer was like, sit and talk with them. When you have a teenager or around that age, that's easier said than done. Because the conversation goes something like this. How's school? Good. What did you do at school? Literally, quote from my daughter, school stuff. We did school stuff. And see, here's the thing. When you begin to ask them for details, you get this face. Kind of like you pulled their teeth and they're in a lot of pain, but you did none of that. You're just asking them to give you details about their daily life. And so it's not easy to connect with your kids. It takes time, effort, and you have to learn how to do it. And there are so many parents that I've seen give up connecting with their kids just because it's hard. But just like that one thing, there are a million things that we don't do because we're not willing to put the time, the effort, and learn the experience that we need in order to do them. But we cannot be that church. If we're going to be people that are led by the Spirit, there are things that are going to look really funky around here. Like Paris is going to have to get on the phone and make some justifications for how money is spent that people are going to go like, why are you spending money on this? Why is this taking so much time? And Paris is going to go, it's because this is how the kingdom works, my friends. And that's how it works. Thank you very much.